My name is Danny, and this happened to me when I was living with my dad at the time of this story. My dad worked 2 jobs, and I was only 18 at the time and was a part-time college student, so my dad would oftentimes be called into work while I was either at home or school. This particular night, my dad had been called into work for one of his jobs for a possible storm emergency and wouldn't be back until the next day. This was during hurricane season, so him getting called into work wasn't too big of a surprise. Anyway, my dad had already left for work and I was laying on the couch watching a movie while somewhat enjoying the sound of rain and thunder from outside. At one point during the movie, I for some reason fell asleep and woke up to the sound of the home phone ringing. This wasn't too sketchy as we get calls almost every day, most of the time either from scammers or people looking for my dad through his work. I hesitated and got up to answer the phone and said hello, still in my drowsy state. However, the only thing I heard was a slight static from the other end of the line. The rest was just silence. Just as I was about to hang up the phone, I then heard what sounded like faint crying. I said hello one more time into the phone, and this time I got a response. There was a girl on the other end that sounded around 5 or 6 judging by her voice. She sounded distressed and scared. Then, clear as day, I heard these exact words. "Help me. I've been taken. I've been missing for 3 years." I told her to stay on the line with me and then I dialed 911 from my iPhone. All I told the operator was just to listen. I asked the girl where she was located, but with her being so young she could only describe the house to be small and white. She explained that she was in a dark room left alone. All of a sudden, the sound of a door opening with force broke the silence and the girl began to scream before hanging up. The operator took down every little detail she tried giving us and thanked me for informing her. All the while, I was texting my dad about the situation and he told me to stay calm and call the cops again and give our address for further explanation. The cops did end up coming to my house and I was being questioned for about half an hour before they finally left. The police never did find out who that little girl was or where she was calling from, as it would have been very difficult to trace, but they did all they could. My heart aches for that child, and I hope she's doing alright, but I still have my doubts about that. About 6 years ago, something happened to me while I was home alone that I'll never forget. Because of this, I had to get therapy for 5 months straight, and this is why I will never stay home alone again. I was 12 years old at the time of this story, and this took place in my hometown in Weymouth, Massachusetts. It's a very small town as there was nothing to do, and the antique design of the town made it look also boring and old. One weekend, my mom had told me that she had recently gotten a call back from a job that she applied to and that she had to go into Boston for an interview. She trusted me to watch over the house for a few hours while she was gone. With me being only 12, she went over the rules most parents tell their children when being left alone. Don't go outside, don't answer the door for anybody, etc. She then left in a hurry and I had the house to myself for a few hours until she got back. With nothing to really do or anywhere to go, I simply threw myself onto my bed and flipped on my TV to the cartoons. About an hour later, I go downstairs while on my way to the kitchen and I notice somebody standing in our backyard. He was facing off in the opposite direction with both of his hands in his pockets as if he were waiting for the bus. At first, I didn't get too worried as a few men had been coming by to fix a pipe on the side of the house that had a major leak. However, this guy looked nothing like a plumber or anyone who specializes in repairing pipes for that matter. He wore a black long-sleeved shirt, black pants, and a gray hoodie that surely covered most of his face. I don't even remember thinking twice about it. Anyway, I had went back upstairs and finished up my TV shows and decided to go take a shower as I had a birthday to go to later that night. I turn on the shower and go in for about 15 minutes. I take really long showers, so whenever I'm home alone, I go mental. After I was done, I turned off the water, and that's when I hear the front door open. My first thought was that it was my mom finally home from her interview. So I shoot her a text asking if she was home, and within a minute she replies with, "Hey honey, I just got finished with the interview. I'm driving home now. Is everything okay?" That's when I get a sharp pain into the pit of my stomach, knowing that someone was in my house. And it wasn't my mom. Why my dad isn't home is another story, but I take a deep breath to compose myself and wrap a towel around me and slowly creep down the steps and try and see who it was. Looking back, that was probably the most stupidest decision of my life. As I reached the bottom step, I peeked around the corner and felt my blood run cold. There was a man, about 6'6", and looked to be in his mid-30s, standing in my kitchen. He was holding a large wrench in his hand and was looking directly at me as if he knew I was coming down the stairs. Then, very quietly, he said 5 words that still haunt me till this day. "Run while you still can." That's when I lost it and started screaming while running up the stairs and into my room while locking the door. All the while, I began hearing footsteps coming up the stairs and stopping at my door. I knew he was there because I could see the outlines of his shoes at the bottom of the doorframe. He began banging on the door loudly with a wrench, demanding me to let him in. At this point, calling the police wasn't an option, so I did the only thing I could do. I slowly opened my window and jumped out onto the patio floor. Even though I tried to break my fall, I still landed with some minor injuries. I felt as if 1,000 pounds had been lifted off of me when I see my mom's car pull into the driveway. I run crying to her, explaining the situation, and she immediately takes out her .45 she keeps in her purse and walks into the house. I'd like to mention that my mom had served 3 years in the military, so she knew what she was doing. I heard 2 very loud gunshots from inside my room, followed by yelling and screaming. Police had been called by my neighbors, who apparently had heard the gunshots, and police then took this nightmare guy away. The look the man gave me as he was forced into the backseat of the police car was something that I'd never forget. It was a look of pure hatred and anger, like the first thing he would do once he got out of jail would be to come back for me. We had since moved out of that house a month later due to the constant paranoia I was having, which eventually made me have mental therapy as previously mentioned before. I don't know what the man's intentions were, but if he had a wrench with him, chances are he was probably planning on doing a lot more than just robbing us.
This happened on my 23rd birthday. I'm now 45. I live in Michigan, and this happened early January. I was prepping for a night out with my girl and cleaning up since we normally have parties at my house. My son was home since I was dropping him off on our way out. He was 4 at the time, and I was a single mom. I went to take out my trash, and I'd left my door open a small crack since I was heading out soon. Big mistake. Keep in mind, this was not the best area. I had then heard my son say, "Mom, someone's here." That alone caught my attention, just his voice sounded odd. I looked, and I saw a man who had a mask on and a dark hoodie. He then yells, "I got a gun! Give me your money!" I had literally just got paid on this day, so my first thought was to distract him. My purse was in my dining room downstairs, but I told him it was upstairs. I lived in a townhouse at the time. He grabbed me by my shirt and ripped off my chain. Well, that pissed me off, and at this point I had not seen a gun, so I said, which looking back was a terrible idea. We fought, and he got some good blows on me, but so did I. My son was now screaming and crying at this point. My front door was still open, so I pushed him as hard as I could, and he literally went flying out the door down my front stairs. I then ran outside just screaming and yelling for help. A cop happened to drive by, and he asked what was going on, so I told him, and he took off. It was winter, so they tracked him down and caught him. He went to jail, but he didn't really do any serious time. He was released about a year later. I was walking into a grocery store when I had seen him. My heart stopped, and I immediately grabbed my son and walked out. I followed up with the court, and they claimed that they had sent me a notice, but I never got it. About 6 months later, he was on the front page of the local newspaper as he had killed someone, and he's now serving 55 years. If they would have put him away for what he did to my son and I, a life might have actually been saved. I do still check on him occasionally just to make sure he's still locked up. I was street smart, but this put me on edge for years. I would sleep with a knife in my front door until I met my husband, who finally allowed me to relax and trust again. I'm still so grateful to him. Thank you all for taking the time to listen to my story, and please stay safe. The story happened almost 15 years ago when I was about 4 years old, and although this occurred when I was quite young, the images from this experience are permanently planted in my mind, but a few of the details are hazy. Now, to give some background, my family and I lived in a nice suburban neighborhood about an hour outside of Chicago. On this particular day, I would be in the care of my then 15-year-old sister and her best friend, while my mother would be running the store. She gave us the normal safety talk and made it clear we were to not go outside. She then departed to the store, and my sister and her friend, not even 5 minutes later, suggested we go on a walk around the neighborhood. I remember distinctly my sister then opening the garage door, seating me in my bright pink kid's Jeep, and we began our walk around the neighborhood. We lived in a cul-de-sac and primarily retired community kind of neighborhood. We began going around the block, my sister and her friend having a blast and rebellious behavior as they saw it. Now, I remember that we then turned the street and continued through the neighborhood. We made it about a quarter up the street, when we then saw an older woman walking towards us about a football field length in front of us. We all stopped dead in our tracks. She was wearing a long tan coat. My sister and friend gave each other a look, and we sat stagnant there in place. The woman then being ahead of us held all three of our young girls' attention. After only a few seconds since noticing her, she then realized that we saw her in turn. Within less than a minute of catching her gaze, she then began charging us, yelling at us down the sidewalk. My sister grabbed my pink Jeep and her friend, and then held me in her arms as we ran through backyards being chased by this woman. We made it to our backyard, and we ran inside our back French doors as quickly as we could, immediately locking the set as we scrambled inside. We then heard a bang. We all then turned to see a large man, tall, broad shoulders and built, leaning against the back door staring at us, looking upset that we had locked the door. This is the point in time that my memory turns hazy. I don't really remember what happened after, but I do remember my sister calling the cops and my mom returning home and scolding my sister and her friend for calling the cops, saying they were teenage girls and just liked to start drama. This happened over a decade ago, and we to this day never know what happened to those two, as there were no arrests ever made. My sister and I are still close, yet we haven't talked about this experience in years. I can't forget the vivid memory I have of being chased and genuinely thinking we were doomed if that door hadn't been locked just in time. Dear God, was that a terrifying experience. My friends and I decided to have a sleepover at my house since my parents were gone. This story took place over 10 years ago. My mom told me she would be going to Mexico to visit some family members that were sick. She wanted me to stay and feed and take care of the dogs, so I agreed. She told me she would be leaving Friday night and would most likely be back on Monday. Since I was 14 at the time, of course I was happy to have the house free of adults even for a few days. On Friday she left me money and she told me she ordered a pizza and to tip the driver. She left it around 6 and the pizza got there around 7. I tipped the driver and he left. Around 8 p.m., I decided to call my friends to see if they were trying to hang out, as I didn't want to be by myself that whole weekend. My friends, who we'll call Omar and Lewis, had agreed. We all kind of lived in the same neighborhood, so they had biked to my house. They got there around 8:30 and we were just playing 2K and Call of Duty together, like most teenagers do. We had stopped playing around 11 and we were getting kind of bored, so we had watched a scary movie. I had told them to pick a movie while I went and put some popcorn in the microwave. While I was putting the popcorn in the microwave, I had heard a big bang in my backyard, like something hit our fence. Now, my kitchen is at the back of the house, and there's 2 big windows in the back, so if something was there, it for sure would have seen me. I thought it was probably my dogs just in the backyard, so I just shrugged it off and we watched the movie. Mid-movie, we then hear knocking at my front door. This startles us, so I decided to go see who it was. Well, I go to the door, and I see a girl no older than 19, and she starts banging on my door telling me to open it. I then hear her asking for help, saying to open the door and that something's after her. As you can all imagine, my friends and I are scared shitless right now. Lewis decides to run over to open the door to help her, but when he does, she pushes the door open and knocks him down, and then 2 other guys come right in behind her. When this happened, I knew right then that they were going to rob us. That's when Omar and I run up the stairs, which was probably the dumbest thing we could have done. Lewis got up there quickly and had followed us, and the girl followed us too. The 2 guys stayed and tried to steal anything they saw, including my Xbox. Omar and I ran up to the attic, but Lewis was a little chubby, so he didn't quite make it, and he just ran into my room and then put his body against the door. Luckily, the girl didn't see us run into the attic, but I think she did see Lewis run into the room, so she probably assumed we were in there too. She was pounding on the door when suddenly Lewis just opened it and then tackled her. Lewis then started jumping on her, and that's when Omar and I decided to join in. I'd started to yell that I called the cops and they're on the way. The guys run out, and then Lewis gets off of her and she joins them. They ended up leaving, and we decided not to tell anyone what happened, as they really only stole the Xbox and nothing else. We couldn't really get any sleep for the rest of the night, but we were really happy that we scared them off. I'm really grateful that all of us ended up being okay, and that it didn't get worse than what it was. Last year, I moved to another city after finishing high school. I assessed several college options, and I decided on one that would have me move roughly 3 hours. I found an apartment where I would be able to live without roommates, and that was in a safe part of town with reasonable rent. It was close to some attractions in the city, which was an added bonus to me, as it would still allow me to have a reasonable social life. For the first 4 months or so, it was great. There were absolutely no problems or safety concerns of any sort, and I managed to become good friends with a guy who studied at the same college as me. He coincidentally lived around 5 minutes away from me, so we would often hang out at each other's places. One night, just as winter started, he had called me over to play some video games and hang out. We had a pretty chill night, drank a few beers and had a few good laughs and enjoyed ourselves. At around 1 a.m., we decided to call it a wrap, and I headed home to my apartment. When I got back home, I decided to head out to the balcony that overlooked the entrance of my building to go smoke a cigarette. I vividly remember looking around and seeing absolutely nobody. It was a cold winter night, and it wasn't the weekend, so understandably everybody was at home. Besides the usual car or two passing by, it was dead quiet. Once I finished my cigarette, I decided to call it a night and get ready for bed. I was understandably confused when I had heard a short ring on my doorbell. I stood in the center of my room for a solid few seconds as confusion and a little bit of fear then set in. I snapped out of it and decided to tiptoe to my door just to try and hear if anyone was outside. My immediate thought was that my friend came over to drop something off that I might have forgotten, but then I thought to myself that he would have texted me or called. I probably listened for half a minute or so when the person once again rang the doorbell and then softly knocked a few times. I was stood still, and I didn't want to make a sound so that I wouldn't give away the fact that I was at the door. I heard the stranger pacing around the apartment for a few seconds before he then stopped. I then waited for any sort of noise, but it was quiet. That's when I decided to look at the peephole to see that he had hopefully left. I picked up the cover of the peephole and then took a look. My legs pretty much went numb as I saw a hooded figure looking straight into the peephole. He was holding the zipper of his hoodie so as to hide his face. All I could really make out was his forehead and eyes. He must have either heard me lift the cover or my heavy breathing, because right away he moved from the peephole and then said, "I know you're at the door." Now, by this point, I was pretty much shivering in fear, but I had mustered up the courage to then say, "I'm calling the cops, man." To which he then laughed and said, "Yeah, sure thing, big guy." He then proceeded to wipe away the door handle with his sleeve before then walking off. I understandably called the police. When they came over, they had actually informed me that I wasn't the only one. He had been doing this for at least a month, and they also suspected him of at least one home invasion where a father had to chase him out of the house. I crashed in my friend's house for around a week or so after this before I felt comfortable going back into my own apartment. It's been a year, and I haven't heard any new news about him. He could have been arrested by now, but as far as I know, he hasn't been. I find it more than likely then he simply just moved to a different area. I'm not sure if he had any violent intent or not, but either way, let's seriously never see each other again.